Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Thanks for joining me today. So today I'll be looking at Madame Web. Now I know this is a big, huge blockbuster flop, and a lot of people are hating it and giving it bad scores and talking really negatively about it, which in a lot of ways is fair enough. It's not a great film. It's not so bad it's good. It's so bad it's bad, but in a good way. Look, I'll explain that to you, explain what I mean in regards to that throughout the video, but I really feel like there's something about this movie that is good. There's something about this film that I think will become a cult classic in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong, this film is not great. There is a lot of issues with it, a lot of things I didn't like, but there are surprisingly things I did enjoy of the film. I mean, after viewing it and forming my thoughts around the film, I realized there was a lot I did enjoy. There was a lot I took from it. There was a lot that I felt was good, that I couldn't see when I first saw it. The film has many issues. It's very rushed. The choices aren't great, and they never really explain anything. All the sort of characters just appear. We don't know why the bad guy doesn't have abilities or dresses like Spider-Man. Why he wears no shoes. That was something I kept thinking about throughout the whole film. Why doesn't he wear any shoes? But I've been told recently that is because in the comics that's how the character is. He's well dressed in a suit, but he wears no shoes and he's some sort of creature or whatever. But they really tried to tie it into an evil Spider-Man, which I thought was really dumb. We know nothing about him. Like the rest of the characters and the film itself, it feels very hollow. He's a character that just appears, but he's never really explained, and he's killed off by the end of the film that we still don't know much about him. He just didn't seem to serve much of a purpose except bringing all the girls together. There's a lot of things in this film that felt like that, where they made choices in it that seemed silly, but they did it to create this ability to connect things together. Like she starts having these visions, and the visions are dumb. A lot of them are really stupid and pointless. There's one where there's a car accident which works really well, but there's just so many that is just seeing small glimpses into the future. And she comes to a point and purpose in the beginning of the film where she feels like she can't change anything, she can never do anything different. And then there's a moment where she stops a bird from hitting a window that she saw in a vision of him hitting, and that's her way of going, I can change things, which is absolutely ridiculously dumb. The dialogue's clunky, some of the visual effects are questionable, and overall it just feels like it misses the mark. It feels like it doesn't quite know what it's going for. At times it takes itself too seriously, at other times it becomes too silly and a bit too comical, wherein they should have honed that back down. In a lot of ways it feels like it slips in between Venom and Morbius, in that Venom has fun. It's exciting and interesting. Tom Hardy's performance is really quite odd and strange, but it works for the film. He embraces the oddness of the movie and his performance shows that, and I love that. And he sort of brings something different, refreshing to it, and there is a lot of odd, strange humor in it, which kind of works, which makes Venom that sort of unique film. Maybe not so much with the sequel, but there was something about that made it refreshing and interesting and different to all the other superhero movies, and I kind of like that. And then you've got Morbius, which is an interesting concept, but it takes itself way too seriously. It expects us to embrace this thing completely without question, without argument, without really thinking about what the film is offering us. And I think Madame Web falls into that. It takes itself a bit too seriously, and other times it's a bit too comical. I think if they just went the comical route and just made it much more humorous, which is sort of what I got from Dakota Johnson's performance, it feels very comical and over the top. There are times in the film it looks like she's not quite sure where the story is or what the character is, and she just does her best that she can in that, and I think she's one of the best things about the film. She really does something interesting, unique, and is on par with Tom Hardy's performance. Not as odd or strange, but it's sort of on par with that. And if they built the film around her performance, much like they did with Tom Hardy, I think this film would have been much better received. Yes, I know there are a lot of issues, so maybe it wouldn't have been, but I just feel this was something they could have really looked at, that could have elevated this into something much more interesting and engaging than it actually was. I think it all comes down to either the writers who wrote Morbius and they brought them back and they didn't quite know what they were doing, or maybe they're bad writers, or it's the studio getting involved, telling them what they need to write and create, and it feels like the studio has much more control than they really should, and they've once again do what most studios do. They bring in a director who's done either no films and this is their first, or have done a couple of films, more independent films, and then are asked to direct these big budget films. And I think that's what happened here. I think S.J. Clarkson is one of those. She does the best she can, but it becomes something like Chloe Zhao with Eternals. It's just, it doesn't quite work. And it's because they don't let these directors that they've hired allow them to make the films they want to make. Way down in how much money is this going to make? What's the budget going to be? And just all this stuff that destroys the film itself. And I feel for Clarkson in a lot of ways. But she did do the best she could with what she had. And I think she delivered an entertaining, not perfect film, but there was something really wonderful about it that I just felt engaged and connected to, which feels weird. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine, but there's just something about that film that I really did like. Before I go any further, I want to talk about some of the other things I disliked with the film. I hated the ending. I disliked not the end, the last battle, the last fight, but right at the end. So she falls in the water, she goes blind, okay, I can accept that. But then when we get to the end, she's in a wheelchair. And I know that's part of the sort of character in the comics and stuff and the source material, but it just feels dumb. Like, how did she end up in the wheelchair? This is one of many questions that I asked throughout the movie. Well, how did she end up in a wheelchair? Why doesn't he wear any shoes? Why is nothing ever truly explained in the movie? And that's kind of what lets it down in a lot of ways. They just sort of brush over things that really need to be explained and talked about. Like a big one, that Ben Parker's in it, Spider-Man's uncle, and that's sort of brushed over and you don't really realise or think about till later, and that the kid that's born is obviously Peter Parker. It just felt like, oh, look at how clever we are connecting the universe. And I feel that it should have not been about trying to connect and create a new universe. It should have been a standalone film that could have been built upon later. And it just kind of wasn't. I think this is going to become a cult classic film. A lot of people are obviously going to disagree with me, but I feel it feels like a movie like Showgirls or films like that, where when they first came out, they were hated and disliked and thought as garbage or rubbish. But as years passed, it became a cult classic for a lot of people, and I feel this Madame Web's going to fall into that. There's going to be people who are going to embrace the silliness and the strangeness and the badness of this film, and it's going to become a really talked about and interesting film down the line, in my opinion, because it just feels like there's something there that people are going to latch onto and connect to. And like I said, Dakota Johnson is the best thing about it. Her character's really great. She's kind of this odd but unlikable character in a way, but in a good way. There's something about her performance here where she feels like she's in a comedy, but no one else has been let in on that fact. They all taking it as a real dramatic film, but she's having fun. And like I said, she's not quite sure who the character is or what direction to take the performance in, but she rises to the occasion with what she's got, and from that, I'm extraordinary to watch her in this. I haven't always been a fan of hers. It isn't until recent years that I've sort of become a true fan of hers, and I think this is her doing what she does best, and becomes the best thing about a slightly bad in a good way sort of superhero movie. I found her very funny, unintentionally funny in her choices in particular scenes and what the character does. And like I said, she feels like she's in a comedy, and that's what her performance mirrors back to us. There are sequences I did like. Besides Dakota Johnson, there is other things I did like, particular sequences. I felt the start sequence was okay. Like, the spider didn't look great, and there was a lot of information forced into a small scene. And I thought the spider people who live in the jungle, in the trees, who dress like Spider-Man, I thought were really interesting and cool. But we only get like 5 or 10 minutes with these particular characters in this particular sequence. And I felt that we should have got much more. Should have got half an hour or maybe half the film of it set here, because I just felt this was an interesting introduction to Dakota Johnson's mother's character and what sort of propelled everything forward. And I think if they spent a bit more time here, developed the villain a lot better, we would have had an understanding of how he got these abilities and why he is the way he is and why he chose to be searching for this spider for no apparent reason. But we never quite go back to the spider people or anything like that. Yes, Dakota Johnson's character comes back to the jungle to search for the truth about her mother and who her mother was, but we never see them dressed up as Spider-Man anymore. It's like it loses something. It feels like this scene is kind of tacked on a little bit. There's a lot of scenes throughout the film that feel like that. The train sequence where she's having visions of all the other characters and trying to stop this guy from hurting them, I kind of like that. But that's about it of all the stuff I really liked. But I had this immense feeling throughout. There's something special about this movie, and I'm hoping that people will find that. People might call me crazy. They may not watch any more of my videos, or they might turn this video off. That's up to you. But I just feel there's something special about this movie that's hidden underneath all the negativity and the badness. There's something in the heart, in the center of this movie, that will become something will be talked about long after this film comes out. Sydney Sweeney's character just felt like a bit cliched. It felt like she was like Jamie Foxx's character in Amazing Spider-Man 2. We're just like, oh, we're going to dress her up like she's a nerd and she's sort of awkward and uncomfortable, and then she flourishes, and I just didn't care for that. Here are these 3 teen girls, and they'll go on to become spider people. It's just like... And the biggest issue with the film is no one ends up in any of the costumes. Yes, we get flashes of the future through the villain having this particular nightmare and dream about being killed by them. And at the end of the film, Dakota Johnson's character talks about them being that and they're dressed, but we never really get to see them in the costume. I'm just kind of getting sick of these origin stories. Couldn't she already be that thing, or find out who she is in the beginning of the movie, and it's really about her finding these girls, and then they come up against some sort of bad guy, rather than the bad guy being the driving force behind the characters? It just felt disappointing. I think there are, like I said, redeeming qualities about this film. Dakota Johnson's performance. There is a concept in there, an idea and a story that could have been really, really great, that just got convoluted and weighed down with too much negativity and bad choices. In closing, like a friend of mine said to me, there are no good or bad films. Decision whether a film is good or bad comes down to us. It comes down to the viewer. That doesn't mean that that film's bad. It's just our perception of it, or seeing it and saying that's bad, when it actually is probably good. It's just how we perceive and see that movie that defines whether it's quote unquote good or bad. I think this is a film that could do with more viewings, and I think once people get on board with it, they'll start to see that there is something quite interesting, unique about this film compared to all the other films that have come out under the Sony banner in the superhero genre. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Letterboxd and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.